remember when I came and sat by you at the hospital? I don't know if you remember anything from that period. You were so ill, barely recognisable. I think I spent the first morning sitting next to the wrong bed, didn't I? Well, we've come a long way since then, haven't we? Yeah. Alright, so this one, we need this one to come. Basically, we're going to sort of try and get some steps to get us up to here. And this one on the left is fairly straightforward. Let's put that through the switch so we can get that one up if we need it. This one, though, we want this one to come down a bit, and I think this one to go up a bit. Oops. Okay, so another load of steps here. So this one we want to go up a bit. This one, I think, up a little bit as well, and the other one down a bit. Let's try that. Again, we're going to make some steps. This time, I think what we do is we just don't put any power through the middle button at all. We're encountering our second mechanical square set of puzzles. I think you've got the hang of the mechanical squares now. Time to crank things up a notch. Eh? Ha! In the next room, the frames will not be stacked up or nicely for you to copy. Instead, you have to work out how they stack up. Suppose you saw something like this. You'd think, well, how do I stack up these frames so they reach from the bottom to the top? Well, I suppose those two could just sit on top of there quite nicely, couldn't they? Eh? So, once you've figured that out, you have to imagine what pattern that would make in your head. And then that's the pattern you make with your mechanical squares. The important thing to remember is that the frames will not slide over to your squares unless your squares are exactly the same size as the frames. And you can use the grid lines on the wooden backboard behind the frames to help you. Right? Go!
So the first few of these actually start off stacked up and then unstack themselves to give you an idea of what you need to do. You need to imagine that these are stacked up from the bottom to the top, making a full rectangle. Alright, it's a slightly tricky one to imagine, but basically these two here, what are they? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So you get one there, one there. Is that going to do it? Yes, and then two below it. Okay, so what's that? That's. Oh, we can do it like this, can't we? I think. Is that right?
I've been getting weird dizzy spells recently. Like, you know when you've been sitting down for ages and then you stand up in a hurry and your head goes all funny and dizzy. You know, it's like that. But I just get it even when I'm just sitting down. Probably just age, isn't it? What? Yes, I know what you would do if you were me, Melissa.
Okay, so here's this fairly straightforward setup. Not too many choices about what we do. It's the new start platform. Oops. I want them both to go up. And then this one looks almost the same, but if we try and set things up the same way, and we don't actually have a fuel cell here, but we can attach it to these connection points, we find that it's not going up high enough for us to be able to get through the room. So again, hopefully things are set up in a way that it should be fairly obvious what we need to do. We connect both of them across these three-way junctions. And we can see now that they've both got the full amount of power, both are right up at the top.
This fuel cell is delivering the full amount of power to two machines at the same time. Is it a special fuel cell, I hear you ask? Is it a special fuel cell? No, it's not! It's all about how the machines are wired up.
Okay, so we've got single fuel cell powering two machines, and for those of you in the know, you'll see that it's because the machines are wired up in parallel. However, we'll see that more clearly as we go on. So here's another one. This is an old style platform, so we just need any amount of power on this, but this one needs to get all the way right up to the top. So we need to do the same thing again. This time we do have access to the fuel cell. We've got to set up the three-way connectors on our own. And this one is similar, just the connectors are in a slightly odd place. So go like that. This one go up like this. And actually this one needs to come all the way down, and this one needs to come all the way up. So it's just about getting the charge flowing through in the correct direction. So this one needs to go up, and this one goes down.
In these rooms, the machines are not wired up in series. The charge does not flow out of one machine and into another. Instead, the wire splits in two. And some of the charge goes through one machine and some goes through the other. Now this is called wiring machines up in parallel. Yeah, no. But when machines are wired up in parallel, their power squares are placed side by side in the fuel cell. Eh?
Okay, so this one is another setting things up in parallel one. Let's see, this one needs to come down, so let's set this up like that. This one has to come up. So actually there's a couple of ways of doing this one. Basically we've got to get onto this platform up to here and then get that platform raised up to there. These are the old style platforms. So one way to do it is like this.
Against my better judgment, I did go to the doctor. he told me with considerable aplomb that he hasn't the foggiest idea what's wrong with me. No, he's done some blood samples or something and sent them off to a lab. I'm not going into hospital, you know. One-way ticket. This is the last of the mechanical square puzzle rooms. As before, the frames will not be stacked up. And to make things a little more interesting, difficult, some of the frames will be missing. Missing? What's missing? So you might see something like this. And you still got to think, well, how would I stack these frames up from the bottom to the top? And you go, well, you know, those two could just go on top of there quite nicely. And then there's a gap, which is a square, so that's the missing one. So you just imagine that pattern, including the missing one, and that's the pattern you need to make with your mechanical squares. I mean, again, the key thing to remember here is that the frames will not slide over on top of your squares unless your squares are exactly the same size as the frames. I'll see you on the other side.
Okay, these mechanical square puzzles are a bit more tricky. They start off showing all the frames and then some of them drop away. So that one was just 2 frames. Okay, so let's see this one. If those frames stick on top of there, yes, actually what we want is 3 smaller frames and then another big one there will kind of do it. So you can insert a square in between the pattern and the very bottom here. Okay, this is one people get a bit stuck on, but basically this one just needs to come up there. You've got 3 of them in a row and then room for another square next to them. Here we kind of bring it all together about the mechanical square puzzles and how they relate to the normal circuit puzzles. So the puzzles you have solved with the mechanical squares are related to the puzzles in the normal rooms. The squares must fit between the top and the bottom connector, and to achieve this they can change their size. This is exactly the same way that power squares organise themselves inside a fuel cell when wiring up machines. The sizes of the squares show how much power is delivered to that machine. Wire machines up in series to place power squares on top of each other. Wire them up in parallel for side by side. Now try and create very small squares by placing 4 squares in series. So 1, 2, 3. Well done. Now remove the small squares and create 2 large squares by placing them in parallel. Leave one and just create another one next to it. Well done. Now place 3 squares so that some are in series and some are in parallel with others. So we can just more or less place this anywhere. Let's do it here. Well done. The blue lines over the squares show how machines would be wired up to achieve this pattern. So this sort of pattern here is like a circuit diagram. You can see the lines more clearly with the lights off. Try adding and removing the squares. Click here to finish. Okay, well let's just add a few in to get the idea of it. Okay, so this one needs to come down by a bit. Let's put it that way. But I think, as far as I remember, it doesn't want to come all the way down. Maybe it does. You can usually tell whether you've got it in the right place because it kind of lines up with other bits of geometry. And then this one presumably wants to go up a bit. Maybe not that far. Let's just see whether this one's okay. It's alright, this one's too high, isn't it? Okay. So let's just get that resistor in series with it. So we can see the pattern in the fuel cell over to the left there. We've got one big square, which is our platform on the left, which is just connected between the top and the bottom of the fuel cell. And then we've got the platform that I'm standing on, which is put in series with a resistor. So that's 2 squares on top of each other, which is why they're smaller.